Okay, to economics students, this is the June 2013 exam, Transport Economics. Turn the page over. Changes in the UK bus market. Well, there we go. We spotted the market to start with. UK bus industry has undergone radical change in the past 30 years. Got a time period there. For much of the 20th century, the industry was heavily regulated, so it was regulated in the past. Most local bus services provided in the public sector, so we've probably got some kind of privatisation going to go on. 1980s, local bus services were deregulated. Deregulation. So the removal of many barriers to entry, got competition, increasing competition here, significant growth of the private sector, new privately owned bus companies, new entrants into the market, setting up across the country. Whilst this marked a significant departure from what had previously been the case, the emerging private firms aim to maximise profits. So we've got a business objective there. The government still continues to play a role in the industry. That means there's some government intervention going on. Government support can take many forms, which include grants, so some direct payments, and innovative transport schemes, fuel subsidies. We've got two kind of payments for the government, which are paid to operators. And the example it's giving us, the AO2, is the Bus Service Operators Grant. So we know it's a competition, and we know that here we've got the Bus Service Grant as a graph. So this is the subsidy. Over time, we can see that the subsidy is increasing, and it's also increasing in London. The rate, we've got 100, and then probably about 75 beyond that. So the rate is slowing down a little. 50 to 100, 50. So the bigger change is within the first year, and then there's kind of a slowdown in change in the second year. So it would probably be a bit more accurate if I drew that to that, and then a slight slowdown, that to that, and then a slight slowdown. Okay, second part of the case study, Cambridgeshire guided busway open to passengers. Again, still the bus market. A long-awaited guided busway began carrying passengers on the route to Cambridgeshire in autumn 2011. The route, which includes 13.3 miles of guided concrete track, what this means is it's a separate route that's just for buses that other modes of transport can't use. It's the longest in the world. It's hoped that the busway will ease congestion on local main roads and provide an alternative mode of transport. So even if you didn't know what a busway was, you could say, well, whatever it is, it's going to ease congestion. So it's getting people out of cars and onto buses. And it's an alternative mode of transport. So it's a substitute. It's something that they're not currently using, getting them off main roads there. Got a cost there, 16.2 million. Hasn't been the quickest or easiest project to deliver, so we know that there's difficulties in estimating the costs and benefits, and if it takes longer, it's going to end up costing longer. Funding for the development of the busway was provided by the Department of Transport, government funding. It's expected to open in 2009, so you've got 8 years it's taking to get this improvement. Now we've got a little bit of comment. The opinion on the impact was divided. One local resident claimed that it would be good for his business. It's got a positive externality there, as they would no longer be a remote village. In contrast, one group which had campaigned against the busway, so you've got regulatory capture here due to NIMBYs, or not in my backyard, they don't want it in their area, said they remained utterly convinced that it would make no difference to traffic levels on the local and main roads, and it would definitely increase traffic levels in Cambridge city centre. So you've got an ineffective spend of money, probably highlighting that it was going to be inelastic demand, and that more people would still be trying to get into the city centre. Okay, here we are in the question section. So we know that the case study was looking at competition in parts, but then also looking at market failures, negative externalities in the second part. So the first part links to the first part of that case study. We've got this key part here, barriers to entry. What is meant by is just the same as define. So define barriers to entry, only one mark. So anything which prevents a business from getting into the market would be adequate here, or an example to go with that, such as predatory pricing. The next part of the question, or the next part of the exam, is this question: apart from profit maximization, which it said was the objective of firms in the markets, state and explain 3 other objectives which a firm in the transport market may have. State and explain. So you need examples and then what they mean. And this question is a 6-mark question. So each one of those states is 1 mark, so a total of 3 examples and 3 explanations. The other objectives that you have are you've got sales maximization, if you want it. You've got satisficing, if you want it, and you've got survival. You could also have sales revenue maximization, but I think those 3 would be the most straightforward. If you think about the graph, you can explain it with the different points on the graph. So if you wanted to say sales maximizing, you could talk about this point, which is average cost equals average revenue, or you can say the point at which sales are greatest, or output is greatest, while still making normal profits. If you're going to go for satisficing, it's creating a level of profit that keeps businesses and their shareholders happy. So it's where the people that run the business, the directors, decide to do just enough to keep the shareholders happy, to make a small amount of profit, not a large amount of profit. So it may be at this point, it's not a profit maximizing, but it's still creating some profit. Survival, again, is average revenue equals average cost, but it's at the point where sales are lowest. So it's a low output for that one, and that one is at a higher output. It would also be with the objective of increasing market share, whereas this one is about staying in the market in the longer term. The next question says, using figure 1, compare the change in the bus operators grant received by bus firms in London to those in the rest of England. So figure 1 was the subsidy graph here. So you've got England, or the rest of England, is always greater than London. You've got that the rate of change increases more in the first year than the second year. That's something that they've got in common. You've got that the lowest year is 96. You've got the highest year is 2009-10, and there's 4 marks. You could also give some figures. So from 150 million to roughly 325 million, or maybe even lower, 315 million. Or you could say from about 25 million up to about 110 million. So giving those specific examples of the figures, but you've only got 2 marks. So lots of points, but only 2 need to be made. But the key part is comparison. So one, that the rest of the UK is greater than the London market, and that both of them increase more in the first year than they do in the second year as a percentage. The next question is looking at subsidies. Again, this time it's saying use a diagram, but you've got the axis here so you know to draw it. Paid to producers such as bus operators. Nice straightforward subsidy graph, shifting supply to the right. There'll be probably 1 mark for that and 1 mark around the price falling to P1. So this part here, that'll be the main 2 marks for that graph because the increase in supply. The most important part, once you've defined a subsidy, so a payment to a business from the government to encourage production or consumption, you need to talk about reductions to average cost or costs to the business. That's the most important step, and that is the thing that causes supply to shift. So it's the fall in cost here that causes supply to shift. And just notice the error there, 1 to 2. And that's what brings down price. So it's 1, 2, 3. And that's the key stages when you're describing that. Remember to refer to the graph, so refer to P1, refer to S2, but this falling cost is really important if you're analysing a subsidy. Next question is a comment question. So we know that it will be partly EO3, partly EO4. You've got 5 marks, so roughly 3 of those are going to be on the comment. The extent to which that should be used to make your judgment. You know it's saying local bus markets, so it's London and the rest of the UK are oligopolies. A good approach to this is to start with to look at the features of oligopolies. So something like high barriers to entry, that would be a good place to start. And looking at the examples of that, and it could be outside of London, you've got economies of scale. So you're explaining why that creates a barrier to entry and why that means there is very few firms within the market. You could specifically say a 4-firm concentration ratio. You could say a 5-firm concentration ratio greater than 50%, but something that explains a feature, which gives them economies of scale. And I think EO2, if it's bus markets, you could talk about something like the buses themselves. So buying buses as a capital good, that will get your EO2. You've got your point, economies of scale. You're explaining it with higher barriers to entry, fewer firms. Yes, it's an oligopoly. The reason why you might not is because you can talk about the level of profits within the London bus market. What you could mention is that because of the regulation of the bus market, that it means that firms can't price make and they can't make abnormal profits. So if that was the case, you could say that they are maybe a contestable oligopoly, or that they aren't able to fully take advantage of their market structure. This question is a discuss question. 8 marker, so 4 for EO3, 4 for EO4. Rise in competition, so same as saying more firms in the market or a less concentrated market on the level of efficiency in a transport market. Very popular question. Always comes down to the point of an efficiency. So you're saying productive, allocative, or dynamic, and agreeing with it, or saying why it doesn't happen. So the key thing is, does more firms in the market, more competition in the market, less concentration, improve efficiency. As this is only an 8-mark discuss, you could get away with one on this side, one on that side for productive, or the same for allocative, or the same for dynamic, and then it depends upon and your judgment at the end. So for example, you could say that more firms in the market mean that they need to reduce costs to make profit. This will drive lower average costs, which equals productive efficiency. But you could say the size of a monopoly, if there's less competition, would mean that they could have produced a greater output, so they would gain economies of scale and greater productive efficiency. Allocative efficiency, you could say that competition leads to new and better goods to try and enter the market or to steal market share. But when it comes to a monopoly, you could say that they don't waste resources to not oversupply in the market. Dynamic efficiency, again, you could say that competition drives innovation, but you could argue that abnormal profits are needed for innovation as well. The it depends upon is choosing a transport market. So you could say that monopolies in rail haven't led to any new or better efficiency, no allocative efficiency, or very little allocative efficiency in terms of meeting what the customers want in price. You could also argue that for productive efficiency, that monopolies don't pass on them, or you very definitely should go down that it depends upon the contestability of the market, because it doesn't matter if it's a monopoly, as long as it's contestable, it will get gains in the efficiencies. Okay, so that first part of the exam should take you roughly about 50 minutes, which leaves you an hour and 10 minutes for the second part. You've got a choice between one of these 3 sections, bearing in mind you've got about half an hour or maybe a little bit less for the 15-mark question, and you've got 40 minutes or maybe a little bit more on the discuss question. What you should do is look through them and say, which one can I get the most marks for? Because either A, I know it really well, or B, if this is too easy a topic, I'm going to have to write a lot to get the marks. So first question, reasons why traffic congestion is a market failure. Very straightforward question. You can replace that with negative externality, and that's the same question. So the negative externality graph with the recipe is going to be a lot of the EO3, but bearing in mind that it's transport and you need lots and lots of transport EO2 to get all the 15 marks. So when you're talking about external costs, what's your example of an external cost? When you're talking about private costs, what's your example of private costs? When you're talking about third parties, who are they? How do they face those costs? What is the example of the good or service that's being overconsumed? Discuss the effectiveness of indirect taxation. Again, nice straightforward question to solve market failures in transport. So the key ones, it's mentioned congestion in the last one, but it could also be pollution if you are looking at this question. The key arguments are going to be on the for side, just explain how the tax works, against inelastic demand being ineffective because the quantity won't fall too much. You can also look at the rising incomes, and if it's a luxury good, then the tax will be less effective. Any effectiveness question, so regulation or taxing or subsidies, always combine policies. So it depends upon other policies. If you subsidize, you'll solve the elasticity problem. If you regulate, you can have a greater impact on whether or not consumers follow it. This question here is a simple question, so it will take a lot of extra analysis. The reasons for growth in passenger numbers is basically a factors affecting demand question. So why has demand grown? It's the word missing here in rail passengers in recent years. So you'd be going along a lot of the Pacific route. The best ones are going to be incomes, because then you can talk about luxury goods or normal goods and include YED. You could talk about complements and substitutes and then the price of those, and then you have XED. You can also just talk about the price of other goods, so the price of cars or congestion as being the factor that affects that. But supply and demand graphs are going to be the things that you draw here. Rail privatization has been a success is similar to the questions that you would have got in F581 about should something be in the public sector. A2, it's essentially similar to the efficiency question that you just looked at. So the thought is that if you privatize something, competition increases. So it's the same question about whether or not something will increase competition. The case against is that you then just create a monopoly in the private sector and you don't get dynamic efficiency, you don't get product efficiency, you don't get allocative efficiency. And then your judgment is whether or not you think this has been success. Again, around contestability, because if it's a contestable market, then it solves some of the problems. And whereas rail is a contestable market, it hasn't really benefited consumers to the same extent. Examples what a sustainable transport policy is. Key thing here, don't forget the word A. You're applying it just to the A market. So what policies could affect A? You've probably got tax, pollution permits as the main two. And when you analyze one of those using the graph, what you need to talk about is reductions in CO2 per person. So it doesn't really matter what the total emissions of that flight are, the number of people can reduce it. So anything that encourages full capacity, anything that encourages people not to use air as much is going to make it more sustainable. And it's from that point of view of creating less pollution or using less fuel. Discuss whether or not the government should expand the road network. This is a case whether or not we build more roads. And this question is essentially an increase in supply. So if you increase supply of roads, you reduce the price of roads. And one of the costs of roads is congestion. So if the price goes down, that's partly the external cost, and you've reduced it by doing that. The arguments against are negative externality arguments, that in the long term, demand will rise. And when demand rises, that will just bring back up the external costs, and you'll end up with a lot more cars on the road, a lot more problems. The question for that, because building more roads is a government policy, is you look at other government policies like tax, like subsidies, to improve the economic efficiency of the UK economy. Your task, or something to go away with, is that you could, and probably should, have a go at this question at the bottom. So have a go at that one there, write it up, and leave it on my desk on the ground floor.